of this data. But the main problem remains. Every time that we have to talk about women's rights, we always rely on legal perspective. But any law will be effective without social change. So thank you so much. And this is it.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. It was so interesting to see, your views on menstruation apps and so on. I had a question around influencers. So online, we're seeing more influencers, like for example, on Instagram, who are suggesting, young girls use these calendar method apps, or discouraging young people from using contraception because of skincare side effects that they personally experience. Do you have any suggestion on how we could address the sharing of health misinformation that circulates via social media?
This is interesting because it is an interesting topic also for a kind of regulatory proposal about the FinTech. Speaking how this kind of misinformation are affecting women as well. I never thought about this approach, but it's interesting because most of people that using this kind of apps is young women. And in this kind of context, it's more difficult to protect them, including in the GDPR context, because from the GDPR perspective, children under 14 years old, they are considered vulnerable. But in this case, we have children that should be considered vulnerable, but using a product that is for adults. So we are not able as well to protect them in this kind of perspective. So it's very interesting. Thank you so much for this question, because it is another point of view to how to treat this kind of data and this kind of using of this kind of apps. So thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, so next we are going to have Lorraine Heyman, who is joining us remotely. Lorraine, are you able to share your screen? Lorraine,
Hi, sorry. I couldn't find the apologies.
Cannot
Can
hear
you
you.
Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. If you're talking in the room, the audio is not very good. Are you able to see my PowerPoints? Because I'm
Okay.
sharing my
Our
screen.
tech people are on the case. Perhaps
Oh, they
you
are,
can see if you can share your screen in the meantime.
Yes, I am sharing it. I will
on
stop
the Zoom?
sharing it and I can
Why
try
can I
again.
not?
Let me give it another go. How about there? Oh, yes.
Oh, there we
I
go.
can see
Perfect.
it. Yeah, can you see that? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
And can you hear me clearly? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm gonna start then because I can see the screen and I think you can hear me. So perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much for joining.
Okay,
Well,
I've unmuted my Zoom. Laura, still can't hear you, unfortunately. I will.
you can't hear me. Okay.
I can hear you. It must just be the speakers in the room.
Ah, okay. Oh no. Thank you, Tracy.
Sorry, I just wanted you to know if somebody can hear you.
Thank you.
Should we try through the laptop to put the sound on?
Please give us a minute.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
thank you.
Then we will ask every author if they are happy to share the slides because one author that it's not a work, it's a non-archival paper. I think that's that. Okay, perfect. So yeah, we can, I have a folder, so I will give you access to everyone.
Excuse me?
Is it okay, or should we?
Remarks the online speaker to try again.
Oh, Lorraine, can you?
Oh, I can hear
try
you, yeah.
again?
Yep, I'm trying now. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
yes,
Yay!
amazing, we can hear you.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Great. Well, I will crack on then. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you joining my presentation. I'm talking about perspectives from Ireland, the psychological harms of cyber-located sexual violence. My name is Laurie Hayman, pronouns are she, her, and I'm a doctoral researcher based at the Centre for Global Women's Studies in the University of Galway in Ireland, which is where I'm joining from you from right now. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present here remotely. I really appreciate it, and for all of the work that the organisers have put into arranging this much needed and very welcome workshop. Okay, so to start with an overview, by the end of this quite short presentation, I aim that you will have a better understanding of how non-physical, non-contact online forms of sexual violence, which I collectively refer to in this study as cyber-located sexual violence, and how these psychologically harm women living in Ireland. I recognise that these forms of violence have a multitude of harms, including physical and economic, but for the purposes of this presentation today, I'm focusing specifically on psychological harms. Firstly, then, to conceptualise what I mean by cyber-located sexual violence and share a bit of background about the study. Cyber-located sexual violence reflects cyber-located, non-physical and non-contact forms of sexual violence. So this includes things like image-based sexual abuse, cyber-flashing, sending unwanted, unsolicited sexualized comments, threats, and sexual requests that Jane referred to as e-bile. It also includes cyber stalking, and in my research, I recognize that this is a gender-based form of violence and a form of violence against women and girls. I'm really conscious after Olga's keynote earlier that this perhaps does contribute to linguistic ambiguity in this space. So I kind of wanted to address that at this stage really briefly. The naming of these types of online forms of sexual violence reflects, firstly, the use of cyber in recognizing this is interdisciplinary. I wanted my concept and this conceptualization here to speak to cyber and cybersecurity more generally. Also, I really wanted to reflect that this is understood by the women in my study as a form of sexual violence. So the research and the data that I present to you today, these women were also asked whether they understand these acts, these behaviors that I've just highlighted here as forms of sexual violence, and they overwhelmingly, over 95% of them said that they did. So yeah, feel free to ask questions about it, but I just wanted to highlight that at this stage. So now to share a bit more about the actual paper that I'm presenting on. It does form part of a wider doctoral study that is ongoing. I'm hoping to graduate my PhD in, let's say, summer 2026, fingers crossed. And in my study, it's a mixed methods interdisciplinary study, but I do have a social science background and a peace studies background as well. So not law and not really tech either. In my research, I utilize a feminist methodology and I draw on mixed methods data collection that is sequential. So I started with the quantitative questionnaire that's featured in my paper and the data I'll share with you today, which was then followed by interviews with victim survivors and key informant professionals in Ireland as well. Overall, my study examines the experiences of women living in Ireland concerning various forms of cyber-located sexual violence, and my aim is to provide evidence-informed, victim survivor-centric recommendations for policy and practice in Ireland and beyond. So to the data collection methods for this paper. As I mentioned, I draw on a quantitative questionnaire, and those are the results that I focus on in the paper. Particularly the answers to the question, have any of the following impacts ever been relevant to you because you experienced unwanted negative sexually based behaviours or actions online and/or via internet connected devices? And that particular phraseology was taken from existing literature in this space. After the data cleaning, I had 281 people who identify as women respond to this question, and that's the data I'm drawing on in my paper. However, I also add some reflections from my researcher diary because I wanted to add a little bit more depth to the quantitative findings by adding some qualitative aspects. And so I reflect from my researcher diary on the ways that cyber-located sexual violence has psychologically harmed me as a researcher and witness to it. I thematically reviewed and analysed my researcher diary, particularly paying attention to indications of psychological harm and distress in it. So to the findings and discussion. Firstly, the harm that cyber-located sexual violence causes to women's mental health is stark and very revealing in the results highlighted on this slide here. To me, it was really striking that almost 30% of the women blamed themselves for their cyber-located sexual violence victimization, which is suggestive of an internalization of victim blaming attitudes that manifest as a form of self-blame for victim survivors. Such victim blaming attitudes in Ireland were highlighted in the 2024 Public Opinion Eurobarometer survey, where 1 in 3 Irish people believed that if a woman shares an intimate image with someone, they are at least partially responsible if these images then get shared online without their consent. This suggests widespread victim blaming attitudes in Ireland concerning various forms of cyber-located sexual violence, which may have been internalized in almost 30% of the women who responded to my questionnaire, and is further highlighted in 18% of the women thinking that people blame them for their victimization. I also found that 39% of the women reported that they worry this experience will happen to them again, that they will be re-victimized, and 37% feel humiliated, offended, and intimidated due to cyber-located sexual violence happening to them in the first place. These findings illustrate the extent to which cyber-located sexual violence has an ongoing psychological impact on victim survivors. However, at this stage, it's important to highlight that not all of the 281 women would experience cyber-located sexual violence and its psychological harms in the same way. For example, by including an intersectional approach in my analysis through cross-tabulation and statistical analysis, I revealed that the women who identified as LGBTQ+ were more significantly affected concerning their work and study performance compared to their heterosexual straight peers, illustrating a difference to how their mental health was impacted and showed up for them, which offers greater nuance to the data. So firstly, cyber-located sexual violence harms victim survivors' mental health. Next, 51% of the women reported that they now approach romantic and sexual relationships differently due to their victimization, which suggests that just over half of them associated their experiences with romantic and sexual lives, which perhaps is unsurprising given how many of them also reported that this happened via dating apps. Additionally, 18% of the women also spent more time alone and reported that they actually limit who they spend time with and in what context, highlighting that cyber-located sexual violence plays a role in isolating women who have been victimized from their support networks. It's well established in the literature that a positive support network is really important in maintaining mental health, particularly in the aftermath of experiencing something traumatic. So for people who have experienced trauma, they will often rely on their intrapersonal coping mechanisms and relational support networks rather than accessing formal support services, for example. So this really indicates the significance of cyber-located sexual violence, reducing women's support networks and isolating them at a time when they are likely to most need those networks to support their mental health. Cyber-located sexual violence harms women's mental health, it harms their interpersonal relationships, and it also affects how safe they feel. 31% of the women said they worry about their safety after experiencing it, and 23% use social media and networking apps less, indicating that they also self-censor and silence themselves online. The European Commission's directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence in 2024 explained that various forms of online violence against women can have the effect of silencing women, hindering their societal participation. My findings strongly echo this, suggesting that cyber-located sexual violence really concerningly silences women in Ireland by preventing them from feeling comfortable expressing themselves online and forcing them to stop using spaces in which their voices can be amplified, such as social media platforms. And then turning to my own reflections, being exposed to the presence of cyber-located sexual violence through my research and witnessing the impact that it has had on women targeted has resulted in several psychologically challenging experiences for myself, including experiencing vicarious trauma, feelings of anger and powerlessness, as well as a fear that I'm going to be victimized in the very phenomenon that I'm researching, because I'm an openly feminist researcher examining violence against women and girls, and I have an online presence. These negative impacts and the fear of being targeted are likely experiences that many researchers working in this space face, and women more generally who have an online presence, which, let's face it, in 2025 is likely to be most women. So finally, just to quickly sum up, while cyber-located sexual violence harms victim survivors in multiple ways, the psychological effects, the negative psychological effects of victimization are considerable. The 281 women who responded to my quantitative questionnaire demonstrate that it inflicts various interconnected psychological harms in their lives, including their mental health, their interpersonal relationships and trust in others, and how safe they feel. However, as mentioned, it's important that not all of the women were harmed by cyber-located sexual violence in the same way. To these findings, I then offer additional depth to the discussion by reflecting on my experiences of being psychologically harmed as a witness and facing an exposure to cyber-located sexual violence through my research, which I think highlights how this is a form of online violence against women and girls that is harmful not only for victim survivors, but also for their supporters, their friends, their families, their communities, and wider societies worldwide. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, and thank you for sorting the tech out. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where the QR code should take you. And I would very much welcome any questions either now, or you can email me or LinkedIn chat me as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for your talk. Shall we?
Thank you.
Sorry,
Can you hear us? Or-
can you hear us, Lorraine?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can hear. I
awesome.
can hear you more clearly when you're at the mic.
Okay,
But yeah.
great. Does anyone have any questions for Lorraine? Okay, they're in the back of the room.
Thanks very much for your talk. I'm very interested in hearing maybe a little more about your experiences with your own reflective diary about the process of your research. And I guess my main question is, would you recommend that the rest of us studying these sorts of things do this as well? And if there would be, perhaps another future conference presentation or some research articles about, what it's like to study these types of topics. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for your question. I mean, I think every researcher should definitely keep a diary, not only this specific space, but I think it's a really useful reflective tool. And then as you really do highlight there, it can become a form of data. That in my work as a social scientist, drawing on qualitative methods, it's absolutely a form of data. In terms of will there be future conferences about this? I think so. It's a kind of side piece that I'm doing in my work that has come through the kind of negative impacts of this research and the vicarious trauma that I've experienced, is working on how researchers of sensitive topics and emotionally demanding research, how they actually manage that, what supports are available, and really across the board, the answer is not managing it particularly well and very few supports available. So the researcher diary isn't a solution to that, but it's certainly a way of reflecting on these things and actually being able to almost take a step back a little bit from the initial feelings of fear and anxiety that they may induce. But also it's a piece of data that absolutely I think can be used to support recommendations for let's say bettering conditions for researchers in this space. Yeah, thank you. I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, well, thank you. I think then we will break now for coffee, and Lorraine, thank you again for joining in the middle of the night, and good night to you. Yeah, so we
Thank you,
will,
good night.
we're breaking a little bit late, but we will restart at 11, please, because to keep with the rest of our schedule. And yeah, we'll see you shortly then.
Thanks, everyone. So I don't know if.
I'm okay.
Yeah, I was expecting all of you when I arrived, it was another setup. I've been running up and down. Yeah, can we chat? Is there anywhere to chat? Because that's the problem.
We don't have it?
On the wall. What, we talk all the slides there or?
But I will get them now.
Okay, maybe you can use your laptop and I can be in chat. Huh?
Log into Zoom first.
Okay, so you prefer? Is
Oh,
this
that's
laptop
okay. I mean that.
Uh-huh.
So, you may leave the Zoom meeting, that's okay.
Okay,
And you need to use your laptop to join the same meeting room.
okay. So that laptop.
Yeah.
So let's. Like on Monday.
Sorry, why do we need to use this laptop?
Because it's like the Zoom.
It's totally fine if you would like to use a
No, I'm
laptop.
just curious to know if we have an issue again.
Anyone
Either
of
one,
laptop.
if it's connected to the Zoom.
Yes, it will be fine.
Great.
Okay, so. Yeah. Does that connect there, or if not, you have
I have a longer one, I think.
You, okay, if you can,
No, I don't have.
I think it's the same, yeah. Okay, so we should stick with yours for now,
Yeah.
charging mine.
Okay. Okay.
The problem for this one?
No, not at all. Do you need a charger?
Yeah, like an extension cable, maybe you can
Ask
ask
your
for one,
finance.
and you can fix this, okay, thank you.
Okay, for a few of them, there are a couple.
Yeah, so now let's check this cable now.
The next one is United We Stand.
Be amazed with the.
What's the author?
So now we have United We Stand
Mhm.
that I think I should have named it that. Stand and
This
inclusive
one.
finance.
Is it this one?
That one.
No.
I know, yeah, that was one, sorry, that's the second one, the one that you just opened,
This one is too far. No, the one here.
no, no, that's wrong, I think it's this, right, this one. Okay, that's the second one, and then we need the United We Stand.
I don't see that.
Mm. Mm. I think, yeah, sorry,
Mm-mm.
yeah. No, yeah, and I know.
What is the author name?
Uh, no, sorry.
Here we go.
it's
I
not-
have it. I have it.
No, the wisdom, perfect. Okay.
Okay.
After that, we're trying to talk with Helen. So it's Helen online.
Charger, what is it? That's like so I will plug it here and give it to you up with
Okay,
the,
perfect.
can we
Thanks
move
a
the
lot.
laptop in the password?
May use mine. Yeah, because it's one of those adapter.
Should be something here. Will you use it, move the laptop, is it okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Put some here. Use a channel. Is it on the left or right? You can have one on the right. Yeah. You can come back, please.
So you can,
To go.
right, Christine, maybe to. and
Yeah,
you'll
you're
have
ready,
everything.
yeah, plug it.
Fine.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Oh, sure, it's charging. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Make sure the camera is, isn't connected. And we'll plug this, we have to that.
Mm-hmm.
And we will see.
How do I check it? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Oh, so it's expected that it's on. Sure. Maybe a little bit higher. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good.
Just one thing, we will have to mute as before, your laptop.
It is muted.
And not plug the audio.
And not what?
So plug the audio off Zoom. The audio off the laptop.
Laptop is muted and Zoom audio should be on,
Yep. so you can-
but we had the reverberation. Okay.
But
But
Let the.
It's still doing
There, when we have the. Broadcast.
we are in the Zoom meeting.
Let's check the-
Crazy morning.
Yeah, it's morning with the lag, so it's amazing day.
Oh, I should give you my drugs.
Oh yeah, I brought like you cannot buy melatonin was?
Melatonin. yeah.
Melatonin, you cannot buy it in the UK apparently, but yeah,
Yeah,
bought that.
yeah.
Good. But yeah, I bought other pills to fall asleep. Weak, but I just take one. Die.
But this one is good. So the melatonin is a well, I don't know. I read this book, Why We Sleep, which is all about why we sleep.
Hi.
So like on the Zoom, you say? Do you have the Zoom? I don't have.
No.
Okay, maybe we can just ask, wait. Can they hear us? So I'm gonna ask this. Can you speak three? If it works.
We can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, so you can,
Okay.
can you hear us, Tracy?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
So we keep it here and copy it this way.
okay, perfect. Thank you. So now it's working,
problem.
great.
Okay, so for this one, you have questions. Yes,
Okay, United we started. Okay, yeah,
I can handle the sharing
Okay,
if you want to. You can sit
perfect.
down with it.
yes, please. Thank you.
I just want to
Okay.
run to the bathroom. And
Okay,
I'll be right
great.
Now it's looks like it's going to be like there.
Yeah.
I mean, like, circular management on the end of yeah, there's always like.
So well, CI on the next version of this semester. That, and then Daria is here. Yeah, so I'm the later one. The new version. It's already provided. No, not yet. Okay, it's still on the way, and so we're still. It's really hard. So, yeah, we're still in the process. Research initiative in big interdisciplinary about online communication. A lot of that is focused on doing things.
Yeah.
Maybe give it.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I went to the common breakfast and they were.
Grab one and take it home.
Do you want to keep that one? Yeah, I think like the.
Because that's the politics piece that I want to.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I just sold it today, like some days. Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, I've been worrying about this. Are you sure? Do you want?
Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just about ready to get started with our next session. Can someone online just confirm that you can hear us and that everything's fine?
Yes, hearing you. Yep.
Lovely. Okay, so the first paper is called United We Stand, a call for diverse design teams to prevent technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Any of the speakers? Okay, speakers are en route. Let me get their slides shared. Hang on. Okay, so it is now in the. So can I move this there? There we go. And then we share. That work for you?
Is it possible for me to see that as well? So I can
Yes.
see.
Okay.
Well, I'm showing you because I was going to stand here and turn
Uh-huh.
around and be like, what was I saying? No.
Amazing. Thank you. Just click up.
So I have the dubious honor of being the first technologist to stand before you today. I apologize in advance for my brethren. So to just give you a brief overview of who I am, since the middle of last year, I've been Associate Dean for Interaction Technology and Information at RMIT School of Computing Technology, so in Melbourne. Before that, I was a senior lecturer. Before that, I did a whole bunch of stuff, like I was at the University of Melbourne for a bit. I held a Google PhD fellowship. I'm sorry. I was user experience manager in a library for a long time, which is what got me interested in the whole information thing. I even worked briefly at Nokia right around the time they were rolling out the first camera phone. And it was actually a requirement of that camera phone that it made a noise when it took a picture, as an example of when you design for safety, what happens. And okay, next. So a little bit about this talk. First of all, how I came to be interested in tech-facilitated abuse. Then I'll go through study 1, which was that I presented in the paper, which is about web-enabled smart homes. Study 2, which looks a little bit at perpetrators, and then a wrap-up of where I think we should be going from here. So my interest in TFA is partly because I'm a woman in tech, right? Like, and that comes with a whole bag of experiences that nobody wants to have. Sexism, being harassed. You know, I was harassed in my first year of my undergrad and I didn't think it was that serious. And I was just kind of like, well, you know, this is just normal. And besides which, there's only 5 women in the class of 200. So, you know, like, yeah, dude's gonna dude. So partly it's that. Partly it's every woman in tech, right? Like look for essays by women in tech online, and it's all about when they're going to leave the tech industry. And then in 2014, I went to the Australian Human Computer Interaction Conference, and there was this paper on smart meters talking about the privacy implications of smart meters and how, like, the introduction of a smart meter means that the person who holds the account to your electricity can see what's going on at home. And this woman going, wow, this woman having this horrible experience of people calling her from work where the guy was looking at the smart meter going, wow, Kay, your power is going through the roof. Then I was involved in a project that looked at all of the ways that we can be surveilled with technology from a commercial perspective. So, you know, Big Brother is watching. And then I read a post on a parenting forum about this woman whose partner kept screwing around with the temperature of her house while she was in with the baby and he was out because he was the one that had control of the Google Nest. And I started to go, whoa, 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 whoa. We are creating something here that we really need to be thinking more careful about. And that was what led me to start thinking about the smart home thing. And so the paper that came out of the study is linked here. But essentially, this study was a rant with references that I published at CHI going, hang on a minute, what have we done with these smart homes? So I drew together strands from a whole bunch of different places. Online fora, particularly parenting forums, because they're one of the places you can find women online, news articles about smart technologies, and academic papers about privacy and smart technologies, which were really interesting to read because there was a whole lot of, he's not abusive, but he's not abusive, but he controls the air conditioning. So doing all this, I discovered that there were 2 major behaviors that were being enabled by web-enabled technologies introduced into the home. First of all, monitoring, being able to see pretty much everything that was happening in or near a home and then control of the home. So changing the temperature, turning the lights on and off, playing music when you weren't even there. So, you know, essentially we've created this ecosystem of web-enabled technologies that fully enable coercive control from outside the home. You can control the lights, you can control the temperature, you can listen to what's happening in a home, you can see who's coming and going, you can see what appliances are being used, you can see who's accessing your internet, you can see what they're searching for. And this is all enabled by the smart web-connected technologies that we've kind of just developed one by one here and there, wouldn't it be cool to be able to monitor our electricity so that we can be more environmental? Wouldn't it be cool to have a camera on our door lock so that when someone nicks our package, we know that what's happened? Wouldn't it be cool to be able to, heat the house up 5 minutes before you get home so it's not cold, but you don't have to leave the heating on so it's more environmentally friendly? So essentially, we have created this ecosystem where there are a lot of things that can be monitored and a lot of things that can be controlled without thinking through how, when we draw them together, this web-enabled thing essentially creates a prison. And unfortunately, it's a gendered prison. The vast majority of smart home super users, i.e. the people who can control the smart homes, are men. And the vast majority of coercive controllers, and that's based on the UK legislation against coercive control. There have been like 600, when I wrote this paper, there'd been like over 600 prosecutions for coercive control of men and one of a woman. There's not great data about other genders, but we do know that where victims are men, the vast majority of them are in relationships with other men. So, this is a dudes doing bad things problem predominantly. So then there's this second study that was, this study kind of got me thinking about, well, what's going on and why is it like this and who does this and how does the technology promote it? And could we design against it? And if we're going to design against it, I'm from a human-computer interaction background where we design to promote the behaviors we want and we design against the behaviors we don't want. So we need to understand who's doing what with the technology and why, to figure out how we can design the technology in a way that makes it less likely to be used in these horrible ways. So I decided I needed to hear from perpetrators. So for this study, I incorporated a multidisciplinary team, researchers from health, from law. Most of them had a background in this sort of stuff. I was the noob who was like a technologist going, hang on a minute, technology needs to be part of the solution. I still don't think I've convinced my colleagues of that. They're like, no, we need to fix the men. And I'm like, yeah, all right, but we also need to fix the technology, please. So we used a speculative method called story completion. Essentially, you give people a little story stub and get them to say, what happens next? So we created 7 story stubs. Each participant in the study, and we had about 30 participants, saw 2 story stubs. Everyone saw one about a situation where a relationship's in trouble and there is technology available that could be snooped, essentially. So Sam and Ash are having difficulty in their relationship. Ash is upstairs asleep, and Sam notices that Ash's laptop and phone are on the kitchen table. Okay, and those names are deliberately not highly gendered in English, which is the language the study was conducted in, because we wanted to see whether what people would do with the genders of those characters. And then we had other scenarios that were representing financial abuse, partner who's late home, image-based abuse, the gift of a new phone, which we know is a situation where people often start coercively controlling, an ex-partner finding a new relationship, and a smart home. So the smart home, interestingly, not many people were kind of that engaged with it, but abusive scenarios were described in the stories for pretty much all of the other contexts. So the key takeaways from that study is that perpetrators are leveraging and will leverage pretty much any kind of technology there is to both monitor and control their partners. So monitoring finances, setting up a new phone with a program called Life 360 that's marketed as online safety software, but is actually just stalkerware. Using using social media and friends to look at what's going on, all of that sort of thing. It was really interesting to notice the gender of, so people quite often assigned a gender to the participants in the stories. They either reflected their own gender, and we specifically promoted this study to people who had used technology in a way that their partners didn't like within their relationship or wouldn't have liked if they'd known about it, right? So that was our framing. So they either projected their own gender onto it, or they made the perpetrator in the story or the potential perpetrator male. Now, some of the participants did describe scenarios where the perpetrator didn't go on to abuse and essentially said, oh no, out of respect for my partner, I'm not going to do that. But one of the key takeaways for me as a technologist is that the ease of use of technology, like literally we had participants saying, oh, it's easier just to have a stock than it is to have a conversation. And I'm like, whoa, that's not a good sign for the future health of society. But the ease of use of technology was really, they described it as compelling, right? The information's there. I'll just have a little look-see and see what they're thinking, see what they're doing, see if I can track them down while they're out, see what they're buying, right? So this is really problematic. And I actually think technology and the ease of use of technology is creating abusers where they otherwise might not have existed, because we used to have to just sit with our discomfort if our partner was late home, right? And we got used to that. And it's good for us to, you know, practice being uncomfortable. Now we don't have to anymore. And I think that's not great for the health of future relationships. So there are three elements of tech abuse. There are the perpetrators in the middle, there are the victim survivors on the left, and there is the technology. And we've talked a lot, well, we talk a lot, especially about tech abuse, about what survivors can do to protect themselves, which to me is completely the wrong emphasis, right? Like we should not be putting the onus on survivors to either get off the internet or do a million things that makes their lives more difficult to protect themselves. Then there's perpetrator behavior programs and those kinds of things, bans, that sort of thing. One thing that we haven't been talking enough about is the technology. And the technology is super, super, super problematic. And it's partly problematic because of who's in tech. So this quote is from a not abusive participant in a paper about smart home technology. Lock down the thermostat for my wife because she complains that it's hot all the time. Just turn on the fan and stand under it. This guy is not abusive, okay? When the people writing these papers have that, and I'm not criticizing, to be clear, the authors of this paper, because they presumably went through an IRB process where they're like, yeah, we're not going to interview abusers, and then had people say things like this to them. But when we frame behaviors like this as not abusive, because as technology researchers, that's how we roll, that's creating a real problem. Life 360 I mentioned earlier, this stuff is stalkerware that is framed as family safety, and the Apple AirTag literally came out with a sticker on it that said, don't use me to track people, which means they knew exactly what it would be used for and released it anyway, right? We have a problem in the tech industry where we are doing bad stuff and going, oh, well, I'm not going to go through all this because Olga covered a lot of this stuff, but, you know, tech is broadly problematic, and it's worse for women who are not straight, white, cis, middle class, well-educated. You know, the minute you step out of that very narrow definition of what's cool to be a woman, you know, Google has a striking history of bias against Black girls. This Asian woman is literally, you know, I did that yesterday or the day before and took a screen grab. That's DuckDuckGo. Google is not better. Twitter was toxic for women back in 2015. I hate to think what it's like now. Instagram makes teen girls hate themselves, but they keep coming back for more. So maybe that's a feature. You know, technology is not well designed to keep women and girls safe. And I think that's partly because there aren't many women and girls involved in the design of technology. You know, they don't even report on it anymore, but because, you know, what's happening in the US. But the last diversity and inclusion reports still only had about 25% of engineers at Google, Meta, all of the big tech companies being women, and they don't report specifically on tech leadership. And if they're not in leadership, they're not making a difference. Tech needs to be contributing to the laws that we make about this. So I think law does have a role to play, but I think we need experts, and preferably experts who have left the tech industry, like our own e-safety commissioner who used to work at Twitter. Safety by design, look, I don't actually think safety but by design goes far enough. I think we need to reframe the whole thing. And I think the designing cars metaphor is apt, and it's one I've used myself. Like, we would not design a car this way, and technology is just as dangerous. And so we need to be rethinking the design of technology completely. But I think that a key to doing that is having more diverse teams in technology and in technology leadership. And that's me. You've got all my socials there. Questions or comments at this point?
Okay, our next talk is, author is here, Inclusive and Accessible Bystander Interventions for Technology Facilitated Sexual Violence. And I will just grab your slides and then we should be good to go. Great, we are getting better and better at this.
All right, hello, thank you very much. My name is Yimin Chen. I'm a lecturer at RMIT University in Melbourne, working with people, among them, Dana McKay. It's my pleasure to present our position paper here today called Inclusive and Accessible Bystander Interventions for Technology Facilitated Sexual Violence. Again, I think another one of the terms that we've introduced to basically describe the same kind of things. So just real quick, we are living in a world, and sure, anyone who's watched the news or listened to the news or read the news lately, where online safety protections are being removed constantly, continuously, and sometimes shockingly or unsurprisingly. Platforms like Facebook and X have effectively eliminated all of their content moderation policies on hate speech and misinformation. And governments like the good old US of A have purged their regulations and agencies and initiatives that safeguard diversity, equity, and safety in general. So the removal of these protections has provided opportunity and, of course, encouragement to violent online cultures that are hostile to women, to people with disability, and LGBTQ plus communities, and basically any other minoritized people everywhere around the world. And as we've heard, there is this push for rules and regulations, and these are important tools for influencing the conduct and the culture of online platforms, but they are not the only way to create safety. And in particular, we like to highlight the actions of the people who are using these platforms and their effects in helping to determine the character of these online communities and online platforms. And of course, as we are seeing, where regulations fail, online communities then must rely on their own constituent members to promote a more pro-social environment. So we believe then that there is a need for and an opportunity for community-based interventions as a counter to TFSV, tech facilitated sexual violence. And to that end, our position paper here makes 4 main arguments. They seem to not be appearing on the screen, but our 4 main arguments are that first, TFSV is sufficiently different from traditional forms of gender-based violence that it requires tailored approaches to its prevention and its mitigation. Our point 2 is that men must be part of the situation to counter TFSV because as we know, men are responsible for much of its perpetration and much of its normalization. Point 3 is that a bystander intervention approach that encourages and empowers men to act against online violence could be particularly suitable for addressing TFSV. And point number 4, that we need to think seriously and critically about how disability interacts with TFSV. And this is in both perpetration and in victimization, and that the design and delivery of anti-violence initiatives must include participation from people with disability or neurodivergence or from diverse backgrounds, because these people deserve inclusion, not tokenism. Okay, so first point, tailored approaches are necessary. You know, like the more traditional, I guess, offline instances of gender-based violence, the impact of TFSV can be absolutely devastating, with victim survivors suffering psychological, emotional, and economic harms. But our point is, and I'm sure we all appreciate it in this room, digital violence isn't just the same old, you know, sexual violence wrapped up in a shiny new technological wrapper. It presents unique challenges to prevention and to mitigation. So perpetrators are often anonymous, and they may act across national or international jurisdictions, which complicate any sort of legal remedies. And abusive media and messages are also pervasive, persistent, and easily replicatable, and somewhat more recently, easily generatable with new AI tools in ways that more traditional forms of this sort of abuse are not. And while we have heard about laws and regulations, and there are laws and regulations that seek to address TFSV, they do still tend to be limited in scope and efficacy. And many of them do largely leave victim survivors to deal with the consequences of this abuse more or less on their own. And so despite the prevalence and the seriousness of this threat, violence prevention initiatives have been slow to address this problem directly. And one reason for this may be that these organizations and agencies are, well, perpetually underfunded, underappreciated, and understaffed. They simply may not have adequate funding or resources or power to really pursue this, you know, so-called new type of abuse, even though it is decades old at this time. And another perhaps unfortunate persistent belief is that people still think online harms are less real, quote unquote, than offline ones. And therefore they are unimportant, or therefore you should just, you know, brush it off. Now, nonetheless, TFSV presents a clear, there are clear and concerning gaps in how we deal with this type of violence and in prevention of this type of violence against women. So from this perspective, like I said, it is well documented that the preponderance of TFSV is perpetrated by men. And on the internet, despite the techno-utopian dreams of early pioneers in this space, these ideas that the internet would level social hierarchies and open up free spaces of expression and identity for all the world's people. Beautiful dream, but you know, as we've seen, it didn't really pan out. Online spaces have never been particularly friendly or inviting for women, and since the beginnings of the World Wide Web, online social spaces have been incubators for dominant, hegemonic, as well as subcultural misogyny. So we think, you know, we see things like MRAs, the men's rights activists earlier on, leading to pickup artist communities, to men going their own way, to incels in the more recent years. And these disparate subcultures have more or less coalesced recently into the so-called manosphere, with influencers and online communities that are characterized by their promotion of things like male victimhood, misogynistic narratives, and anti-feminist ideologies. But there is perhaps some hope. The trends, the reasons for these trends are complicated, some up there, but a recent Australian e-safety survey has proposed that, quote, young men could benefit from support to address their experiences of isolation and personal disempowerment, as well as from a strengths-based empowering education about the causes of gender inequality and the benefits of gender equality. So essentially, instead of, framing men as exactly the problem or as potential perpetrators of gender-based abuse, we may have, better results if we strive to engage men more as allies in violence prevention, recognizing that, again, while men perpetrate the majority of sexual assault, the majority of men are not directly related to perpetration. So this is where a bystander intervention approach may be effective. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Bystander intervention is a program that is focused on teaching safe and effective ways for bystanders to respond when they witness or become aware of abuse or in emergencies. The basic steps are up there, from noticing that something is happening to then taking action to help. And we feel this model, this approach is appropriate in this case because mobilizing pro-social behavior in this way on the part of individuals and sort of responsibilizing communities can help shift the broader community norms towards more respect and more nonviolence. And in general, we also think that this approach may be effective in the online context because these online environments could potentially help lower the actual barriers of intervention as people experience them. So just as the mask of anonymity could inspire the sort of toxic disinhibition that leads to people feeling more free and open to perpetrating abuse, it could potentially work the other way around, that anonymity can also shield, so-called do-gooders, and a sort of benign disinhibition effect could perhaps help lower barriers for people to try to take action to do good. And furthermore, some of the factors that discourage in-person intervention, such as the threat of physical retaliation, don't really apply in the same way in the digital context. However, despite these factors, other than a few notable exceptions, like the organization Right to Be, there have been few attempts to bring much bystander intervention programming to digital spaces. So our fourth point here, that people with disability deserve inclusion. Well, based on statistics and surveys, we know that roughly 1 in 6 Australians experience disability or neurodiversity, and they are also at greater risk of online abuse than other members of the population. However, despite knowing these things, violence prevention initiatives are rarely designed with people with disability in mind. And so there is also a gap there in terms of knowledge of the role that people with disability can play in the creation and the adoption of bystander initiatives. And even those initiatives that do address disability in some way also tend to do so only in the context of victimization. And this potentially denies people with disability or with neurodivergence from fully participating in preventing and mitigating TFSV. Furthermore, we know that men with disability or neurodiversity represent another largely ignored demographic for bystander intervention efforts, both in the context of anti-perpetration and also in the context of mitigation. And research has documented that bystander intervention is more effective and more likely to occur and more likely to succeed when these interveners are also members of the same broad community that is perpetrating these actions. So in particular, we think that it's important to work with people with disability to co-design intervention that considers the lived experiences of people with disability, of men, and of people with neurodiversity. And given the importance of the relational context in these intervention programs, it is vital that men, and particularly men with neurodiverse or other disabilities, be involved in the design, in the delivery, and in the planning, and sort of arguing for these initiatives. And I hope that researchers and policymakers can make more use of the co-design tools that are available. For example, up here, this is K.A. Mercurcher's model of care approach. So just to wrap up, we believe that addressing the severity and the prevalence of technology-facilitated sexual violence against women is, of course, a matter of great social importance, but we must also take care to avoid perpetrating further social injustices in our efforts to correct the ones that we see. And to this end, we would like to pose that it is imperative that anti-violence initiatives be inclusive and accessible, designed with communities rather than for communities. So thank you very much. I'm Eamon Chen, Dana McKay is down there, and our other group members here, Ronnie Durande and Kate Anderson. And if you would like to get in touch with us, my email's there. Dana's information was before, and we would be very happy to continue this conversation here or elsewhere. Thanks.
What it was like you mentioned about the men being more involved. I guess like for young men, like those mentioned like the work education, but how will you involve those that are already in the Amsterdam, they are totally radicalized, like
Right.
their intervention.
So my personal opinion on this, and I'm not sure if it's shared by my colleagues, is people who already invest in the manosphere are not a great target because you're unlikely to get them to listen, and they've, may have made up their mind. So ideally, these sorts of interventions would be targeted at people who are not, too far into too far gone, right? And so I've been looking at, messaging, like in Australia, there's all sorts of TV adverts about, do you know what your kids are doing online? Things targeted at basically parents, but I've seen very few things targeted at, kids themselves, young men, young boys. And what messaging there is seems, in the parlance, cringe, right? So people are they're not speaking to the people they should be. So, and in fact, they may inspire things like backlash or resistance. So if nothing else, I think we need people in co-design of the target demographic to at least weigh in, to at least be involved in the process so that we can do things not from what we think they would like, but what they might actually like themselves or might actually listen to, right? Hope that answers. Yes.
Thank you. This is not exactly a question, but I think it's more of a reflection I would like to share. I think it will be more correct when we are addressing these kind of issues to focus on the patriarchal system instead of some men misbehaving, because I like, even if in the term patriarchy somehow like the sex of men is somehow embedded, but I think it's a much broader system where like we can find females serving the purposes of like patriarchy or not. And I think this also will help the discourse be much more heard by some groups of men that will constantly feel somehow aggressed or in some kind of a defense position, that the fact that they are being a man, so they are systematically somehow accused, or like they have to prove that they are not abusers. So yeah, it was just more of a reflection. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And I think perhaps to maybe add on to that, and in relation to the previous question, I think if you're talking to some, especially groups of young men, there is that disconnect between our academic language and what they respond to and how they talk to each other. They may perhaps be receptive to critiques of patriarchy, right? And how it negatively impacts their lives. But the way we talk about it here sounds like, people in authority, often women, often, men who don't conform to those standards of traditional masculinity, sort of wagging your finger at people, and they just don't want to listen to that. So I think it is important, absolutely, that we try to do this more ideological sort of social change, but like, we need to do better talking to some of these people, right, in language that they respond to. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so our next event or item is our second keynote by Helen Atkins. Helen, can you hear us, and are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and I'm going to find you, and I think, yes, we have you. Okay.
Brilliant.
If you can start sharing, that would be lovely. Maybe just a short introduction while Helen gets that ready. Among other very significant contributions to the community, Helen studies decolonial feminist praxis at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Regional Coordinating Office at the University of West Indies. And today she's going to talk to us about scaling AI from the grassroots using decolonial feminist praxis for violence prevention in Jamaica. Thank you, Helen. We're so grateful to have you here and look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, thank you so much. And greetings to everybody from Jamaica. It's, well, it's about 9 o'clock, coming up to 9 o'clock on the evening, on Sunday evening here. So I'm in quite a different place, both physically and temporally, but I'm delighted to be a part.
Yeah. Sorry, Helen, for interrupting you. We can't unfortunately see your slides, even though you are sharing them.
Okay.
Can you reshare them again? Maybe stop sharing and sharing again, not help it before. Yeah,
I think that worked.
Yeah. No, it goes maybe.
But it's not here either.
Yeah, I cannot see it. Helen, can you share them? Are you sharing?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening. Let me just.
Does it show on your end that you're sharing at the moment?
Does she have permission?
I assume so.
Should I make her co-host or?
Well, it did just work before, right?
Yeah.
So she should have permission.
Yeah. So are you sharing now the screen, Helen? Or?
Okay, it's not coming up now. Let me just try something else. Okay, I'm just going to shut down and reopen, which sometimes works.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay.
Amazing. Great.
Okay. So if I change it to full screen, you still seeing that?
We are still seeing that at this point.
You're still seeing slideshow mode?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, lovely.
Okay.
Okay. Right, so thank you. I think I was in the middle of thanking particularly the Center for Protecting Women Online and to the Open University's Knowledge Media Institute, the Shifting Power Project, and Doctors Tracy Farrell, Angèle Pavon, and Venetia Brown for making the connection, and to the wider web organizers. I'm honored and humbled to be alongside such role models in the field as my fellow presenters, and I'm indebted to the organizations that I represent today: Women's Media Watch, Jamaica, known as WMW, and the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, the Regional Coordinating Office. Since 1993, the Institute, then the Center for Gender and Development Studies, has expanded activist cultural pedagogy through Caribbean decolonial feminist framing, which I seek to interpret through a diasporic intersectional lens. Oops. And so onto the key themes for today. I will be talking to you about scaling AI from the grassroots, using decolonial feminist practice for violence prevention in Jamaica. And this falls under several workshop themes: the sentiment and emotion analysis, approaches to preventing, understanding, identifying, and mitigating online harms faced by women with multiple marginalized identities, and interdisciplinary approaches to identifying and addressing online harm. So I will start by setting the scene in Jamaica, and before introducing Women's Media Watch and its 4-decade trajectory in advocacy, research, and training to prevent violence against women in Jamaica. And then I'll go on to discuss WMW's recent experiences, learnings, and reflections in becoming a guinea pig or trailblazer for navigating AI from the grassroots to inform community-based violence prevention. And so Jamaica, it is a tropical paradise. It's well known for reggae music and tourism, which accounts for around 1/3 of the GDP. And as the maps indicate, this on the left-hand side, it's intentionally tiny. Jamaica in the middle, dwarfed by Cuba and Haiti to the east, and nothing between Jamaica and Latin America. So one of the national mottos is "We Little But We Taloa," patois, which translates as "small but mighty." And that sums up both the reputation of the islands and the work that it does. So the original inhabitants from around 800 BC were the Tainos, Arawak Indians, who were wiped out by the Spanish, who called the island Santiago until Christopher Columbus renamed it Jamaica, meaning land of wood and water. So several centuries of brutal occupation followed: colonialism, trafficking, enslavement on a globally industrialized scale. This culminated in staggered emancipation during the 19th century, becoming a crown colony in 1866 and gaining independence under the Commonwealth in 1962, meaning that the British monarch remains head of state. The UK's Privy Council is the highest court in the land. So upon claiming independence, Jamaica also claimed one of the lowest murder rates in the world. 6 years later, it had the highest rate, counting over 53 homicides per 100,000. As a small island developing state with a population under 3 million, it's around 2.85 at the moment, the scale and severity of violence reverberates across society. Curfews are common. Zones of special operation, known as ZOZOs, are enforced dotted around the islands. Soldiers with assault rifles are a familiar sight on the streets and roads. Men and boys are overwhelmingly both victims and perpetrators of gang-related violence, whereas the majority of sexual and intimate partner violence is committed by men and boys against women and girls, following global patterns. Little known or discussed is the high prevalence of femicide bordering on epidemic levels over the last decade. However, organized crime and community violence eclipses domestic and sexual violence in reporting and response and prevalence. The women's movement in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean ebbs and flows. And while we see legislative policy and progress in gender mainstreaming, it is juxtaposed with reactionary dominant narratives, right? Juxtaposed with reactionary dominant narratives that entrench traditional gender roles and relations in media and across society. To challenge this, the history of violence against women in Jamaica is increasingly being documented by archivists and activists seeking to uncover hidden truths of the colonial past, not only revising, but rewriting history, if not laying it out for the very first time. So one book which is seminal and lays the turf for where we are today. It's The Slave Society in the British Leeward Islands at the end of the 18th century, which located women as active social participants during enslavement, followed by a historical study of women in Jamaica, which explored women's rights and responsibilities as allocated by virtue of their skin tone. To quote, in Caribbean slave societies, the Black woman produced, the brown woman served, and the white woman consumed. This early diversification of women's identities has evolved into an ongoing process of distillation, constantly redefined and expanded by scholars in the region and across the diaspora. The latter 20th century and early 21st centuries brought waves of scholarship that celebrate, commemorate, and critique the similarities and differences among Jamaican women. So looking at the current picture, it was 1 in 4 prevalence, lifetime prevalence for intimate partner violence in 2016 and up to 2 in 5 by 2019. Instead of shoehorning into distinct theories of propensity to violence, such as biological or psychological, sociological, the contextualization of heteronormative violence against women benefits from the application of ecological systems theory to delineate the various factors that potentially place Jamaican women at risk. This is confirmed by numerous country studies that pick out the relationship between religious beliefs, lack of institutional support, gaps in government policy, lack of intervention and prevention, lack of education, and ongoing economic constraints, along with systems of shame related to government, media, family, community, often leave women feeling isolated, harboring feelings of humiliation, and forcing them back into abuse. In terms of statutory efforts, including the Bureau of Gender Affairs 10-year National Strategic Action Plan for Gender-Based Violence, which runs till 2027, it covers all areas, but is insufficiently resourced. International attention to the cost-benefit implications of gender-based violence was recently afforded through the UN and EU Spotlight Initiative and came up with a total figure of $1 billion US, equating to over 130 billion Jamaican. And this is around 6.5% of GDP as of 2018. A subsequent national gender assessment highlighted a paradoxical tension rooted in the past. Women's greater accumulation of human capital in the form of educational attainment and better health outcomes vis-a-vis men does not translate into gender equality in the labor market, while they see their decision-making capacity severely constrained. So just briefly, just to orient the numbers, offline there is extreme gender difference in reporting of sexual crimes. Victims are overwhelmingly female, island-wide. And there's something buzzing around my head. So I'm just going to ignore it, but it sounds quite large. So if I suddenly run away screaming, you'll know why. So for the distribution of offences, reports of sexual intercourse with under 16-year-olds, in other words, statutory rape of a child, constitute 2 in 5 of recorded sexual crimes. A recurrent cry in the community workshops that we do is, what about the men? It's for discussion another time. But the renaissance of Jamaica's male marginalization thesis, originally presented in the 1980s, was debunked about 20 years later with the Requiem for Non theory. It's since risen like a phoenix from the ashes of early fourth wave feminism in the form of the manosphere. And so we see the Requiem in the middle, Death of a Non theory, the historical study on the right, and slave society. So this is where we were. And moving on to a whole new world, the internet as violence prevention. The timeline of internet speed and strength is reflected by the scale and range of pornographic content online, from ancient cave depictions to 20th century top shelf magazines to intercontinental intercourse using VR. The desire to convey or relay sexualized power and control is nothing new. In the 80s, it took many minutes to download a naked static image, pixel by tantalizing, objectifying pixel. By the 2000s, online users were able to issue torture instructions in real time to perpetrators in Cambodia's hybrid so-called rape camp. So for 2 decades, there has been compelling evidence of the profound and rapid effect of exposure to violent pornography online, with dramatic increase in tolerance for sexual violence, as well as significant decrease in the valuing of consent as a relevant factor. The longitudinal ramifications of shared mass communications, however, are just emerging. So in 2024, for the first time, children are the majority of perpetrators of child sexual violence in the UK. According to official data, almost all are boys, who usually cite online content as motivation. The idea and practice of the internet as a primary educator on gender-based violence specifically, and on violence in general, brings multiple benefits and risks. Advantages center around the democratization of knowledge through universal access to learning, bespoke interactive engagement with user-led source selection, and new horizons only visible from a virtual vantage point rather than in the traditional classroom environment. Despite the value and the level of freedom and choice available via online education, the potential pitfalls to be navigated are many. Misinformation, disinformation, plagiarism, invasion of privacy, and security breaches abound. So for gender-based violence prevention to be effective, harm reduction strategies must challenge and divert both carelessly spread and intentionally spread information that miseducate help-seeking users and otherwise expose people. So looking to online gender-based violence as a site of both public and private conflict, and this has come up already in Professor Rose's talk. For those advocating against gender-based violence, there is a growing moral imperative to understand and act against online prevalence, using appropriate emergent tools in conjunction with established modes of engagement. But for some community practitioners and social researchers, this may require a degree of sensitization to the principles and practices of computer technology that goes far beyond everyday usage. In addition, the internet as a site of conflict is a vast space conceptually and operationally. For prevention purposes, in avoidance of essentialist interventionism, balance and gradation must be struck between spaces and identities, including the very binary ones, online, offline, public, private, local, international, also academic and activist, to name but a few. So turning to decolonial feminist considerations in using AI, in making sense of AI's role in responding to the burgeoning tech-facilitated explosion in sexual violence, and we're really just only on the very cusp of it, a mass of complex ideas must be navigated from non-consensual data capital to techno-symbiosis. WMW's starting point on this exploratory journey was the We Talk media analysis, combining in-house traditional participatory methods inspired by Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed, by Freer's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and Jamaican theatre collective Sistren, and also with cutting-edge technology for gender equity programming. They have been fused together, and I will attempt to explain how we did that. Firstly, to look at some of the theory, and I appreciate that we're at predominantly a STEM conference. There seems to be real interdisciplinary makeup in the room, but just for anyone who's not familiar with decolonial feminism or decoloniality or feminism, it's a rich theoretical space. Decolonial praxis focuses on dismantling colonial legacies, using history to inform present steps towards sustainable equality. It straddles theory, research, and practice, informed by, but distinct from, post-colonialism as a field of inquiry. And despite substantial overlapping tenets, post-colonial thought deconstructs imperial ontologies and their truth. Decoloniality, however, is a dynamic force in the ongoing pursuit of equality to deconstruct the enduring impacts of colonial legacies with critical feminist methodologies. Together, they are highly compatible due to their shared rejection of hegemonic masculinity and unwavering commitment to interrogating and reclaiming asymmetric power. The positioning of Black feminist theory and research, intersectionality, as a regulative ideal supports precise selection of theoretical and methodological approaches. So bearing that in mind, we look to tech in Jamaica, technology-facilitated gender-based violence, but also technology-facilitated advocacy. Underreporting is an issue, but it has risen up both the global and local news agendas in recent years, boosted by the international Me Too effect. But actually in the Caribbean, there were movements that preceded this, Life in Leggings in Barbados and the Tambourine Army in Jamaica, which was 2017. In the latest census, we discovered that 98% of Jamaican women and girls have mobile phone access. So this is wonderful for many reasons, but the ubiquitous use of mobile phones also exposes users to a proliferation of negative GBV-related messaging. On the other hand, it gives us pathways and tools for robust targeted prevention. In the local academy, CARIMAC, the Caribbean School for Media and Communication, recently closed its well-established course on gender representations in the media, to the detriment of aspiring journalists, media students, and public readership. In international research terms, Global Media Monitoring Project provides a unique snapshot of gender every 5 years since 1985. And this looks at a wide range of indicators collected by a growing international collective of research volunteers. All right, so moving on. The journey that WMW took to AI began in 1987 The organization was conceived on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women in response to sexual and intimate partner violence. It's an organization of diverse Jamaican women from different backgrounds and designs and delivers educational initiatives using its art model to create equal spaces. This approach centers advocacy, research, and training in digital and analog formats with multilateral participants from community groups to expert roundtables to dissect gender roles and power dynamics to address past and present challenges in securing a decolonial future without violence. So originally, Women's Media Watch spelled out its name with the precise purpose of its existence to scrutinize the media's representations of women. This started in traditional formats, posters, lyrics, headlines, later a panoply of multimedia digital content. It's a very different world to WMW's early days of founding members in a yard with a car trunk acting as office, workshop venue, and mobile creche. Prevention efforts include national and specialist curricula, legislative and statutory lobbying, gender-based analysis plus, federal reporting, known as GBA plus, media campaigns, academic publications, and international platforms for advocacy. In the wake of Hurricane Beryl in July 2024, WMW extended its remit to include local relief and global liaison on gender-based violence and emergencies, critical for small island developing states. And so, these were written 30 years ago. They could have been written today. And although time is rapidly diminishing, I do want to just share them because they are so prescient to where we are now. Women play a pivotal role in the development of any society. That role is multifaceted and reflected in the contributions to all forms of development. The various roles are not adequately portrayed in the media, leading to a perception that women do not make an equal contribution to the development of Jamaican society. The limited portrayal in the media, furthermore, increases the perception of women as less than capable and often results in negative images. These negative images, women as sex objects, as powerless, as victims, stereotypical roles, further exacerbates the acceptance of violence against women. So central to WMW's prevention efforts is the We Talk project. It's a 5-year initiative funded by the Government of Canada and managed by Oxfam Canada. It was and is WMW's first foray into really big budget international relationship, and the asymmetry was stark from the outset, despite partners' profit claims to be committed to, quote, decolonizing aid. Upon inquiring what this meant to them and for us, it took 6 months to receive a response, and then it really wasn't clear. What did emerge was an ongoing collective agenda and work in progress for us all. Through the We Talk project, we were invited to engage with Quilt AI, an international tech boutique, to produce an AI-powered social media analysis of harmful online discourse in Jamaica. This led to a multidisciplinary mixed methods study to be explored in this session. And to deliver the whole project, the whole We Talk project, which has many activities, this is just one of them, it's unprecedented in size and scope for the organization. And WMW's established methods, which are participatory, performative, and intergenerational, seem to combine well with digital applications. The project design included the AI analysis and using that AI study and its findings to inform multimedia advocacy. Through my combined role as a postgraduate researcher and consultant on monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning, applied with a decolonial feminist lens, it's been possible to interpret the nature, scope, and challenges of this AI journey for and with WMW, an organization composed of varying skill sets and knowledge bases, but with shared experience in relation to sex, gender, and power, intergenerational trauma and healing, and violence prevention as grassroots advocates. So following decades of small-scale creative initiatives, we really pivoted with a crash course in AI literacy. And just to give you a bit of background about the project and where it sits, you see on the left-hand side under Pillar 1, behavioral change. This is where we find the AI analysis. Pillar 1 is for increased adoption of positive behaviors that promote GBV prevention and response. And along with the AI, there's a whole host of other behavioral change communications. And then on the right, we have Pillar 2, strengthening capacity, and again, a wide range of interconnected deliverables. Programmatic design is based on formative research and a theory of change that centers the lived realities of everyday Jamaicans. And that is really what we tried to do with the AI, however much it tried to fight against us. And just for anyone who wants to take a look at the report during this session, there's a QR code there. There will be more to come if you want to get your phones out. So we asked, what are the trends of the online conversation on gender-based violence among Jamaicans, and to what extent could results be used to inform behavior change? It's a mixed method study and cross-sectional period prevalence. Over the course of 2 years, from May 2021 to April 2023, nearly 250,000 Google searches were collated, along with over 16,000 social media posts. The content was specifically Jamaican, drawn from 6 global platforms, and the aim of the study was to gather and analyze online discourse to inform advocacy. Quantitative data relied on AI classification tools, whereas qualitative techniques sought to mitigate and address AI risks and errors using collaborative human rigor. And in terms of objectives, I'm going to skim through these quite quickly, but in essence, to examine and explain recent conversations online about gender-based violence, identify the main trends, the speakers, the sources, and then recommend actions and engagements, crucially, to help us implement and monitor and evaluate the project and its impact on behavioral change. Specifically looking at how we can practically weave this in to amplify communication products and knowledge transfer and community engagement, and particularly to really establish, is it working? So as qualitative researchers, we literally had to say hi to AI using our human intelligence to sandwich the artificial intelligence. We interrogated geographical and epistemological positionality, not just of humans, but also technology and linguistics. We recruited dedicated cultural expertise to help sensitize the instruments, interpret results, and analyze findings. It really signified a new frontier for the organization's core expertise in gendered media literacy, in examining and responding to discrimination online that fuels gender-based narratives and, in turn, by extension, harmful attitudes and behaviors in real life. Working alongside this immense processing power to categorize large data sets within a short time frame, we were confronted with the need to really quickly embrace AI literacy from the distinct perspective of intersectional Black feminist researchers. So we did our best to develop basic AI awareness before moving on from there, and really finding it was a lot more interesting than we thought as qualitative researchers. So a whole new world opened up, and it invited wide-ranging ethical considerations, from the appropriate use of taxpayers' money to projected benefits for intended beneficiaries. So with STEM and humanities consultants, we explored decolonial feminism as a form of quality control. To interpret the world as a socially constructed set of interconnected multiple realities is to allow for the credibility of similar, different, and conflicting views necessary to illustrate an accurate, comprehensive, nuanced picture of whatever is being studied. So as a result, multiple mixed methods were used to triangulate results for the study, with validation drawn from the combined dependability of AI and intersectionality. This blends quantitative reliability with the strength and depth of human experience through subjective standpoints and situated reasonings. Right, so on to the data itself. The methods, first of all. We had a 4-stage process designed by Quilt and delivered by Quilt AI. And through the preliminary research, looking at digital and traditional news, cataloging relevant contents, and then even at the very early stage, trying to identify potential omissions that AI might make and contextualize the study. Data curation, wide-ranging keywords were compiled from over 16,000 posts, accommodating the plethora of topics under discussion. Extraction of data was conducted using API, application programming interface, with the removal of personal identifiable information, accepting public figures and influencers in compliance with data privacy regulations. So stage 3 is really where the AI magic happens under the advanced data analytics. For text semiotics 2.0, comments were encoded into a high dimensional vector space, proximally grouped to measure similar content. Influencer analysis focused on social media users with more than 1,000 followers. The sentiment classification used custom definitions to help AI to navigate concepts of positive, neutral, and negative emotions. Top words analysis really did what it says on the tin, using neurolinguistic processing and NLP tools to extract common phrases and frequency of usage to show how conversations develop around different topics. The intersectional analysis assessed contributions from survivors and other marginalized voices, while the counter-norm analysis trawled posts, challenging damaging myths, advocating for victims, and championing supports. For the search analysis, we will talk about this later on, but In a nutshell, results were converted into accessible information for stakeholders. So multiple subsets of data, rate of change, size of narrative, looking at the proportional weighting in the overall discourse, topics, following themes, influencers, advocates, thematic analysis, search queries, clustering using key terms to uncover the origins of the narratives. And then onto diffusion strategies, which is really where we're interested as the qualitative researchers as practitioners. Once we've done the research, how do we weave it into the public messaging through these diffusion strategies, which give guidance for changing harmful narratives? We have search insights and social insights, which are actionable observations. We have demographic insights, which come from Google Ads, age and gender distribution to approximate primary groups driving each narrative. And then takeaways, entry points for implementing recommendations and data summaries. And so once we've gone through the quants, we then move on to the qualitative methods. We've touched on the theory of decolonial feminist framing, but in order to apply it to this project, we had to frame and qualify the numerical generalizability delivered by AI. So the decolonial feminist approach applied to inform tool design and to interpret results. The lack of direct engagement with survivors limited the prospect of AI-reinforced discrimination. And for the WeTalk target groups, anyone experienced gender-based violence and at-risk individuals, holistic reflexivity supported intersectional considerations for analysis and implementation. It also facilitated safe space conditions for researchers to interact with each other and with graphic content. These considerations surfaced throughout the process, identifying the need for dedicated cultural expertise to help fine-tune the AI instruments, as well as lessons learned for adaptation, implementation, and dissemination of findings. So a note on the cultural collaboration. Carol Watson-Williams authored the Jamaica's Health Survey, as it's called euphemistically. It is focused on violence against women specifically from 2016. She advised us on all sorts of things, culturally nuanced language, attitudes, interpersonal powers, structures, patterns. She also created a landscape tutorial, and this enabled us to really situate the research within the Jamaican culture. She devised a mini dictionary to map out common patois terms that AI may not know about. She critiqued sense-making processes and supported the conceptual development of research dissemination. And then moving on to holistic reflexivity. It was applied throughout the project, and just to break it down a bit, holism describes a 360-degree approach or wraparound to consider and respond from, if not every single angle, as many as possible, to identify, explore, and resolve relevant issues, as many as reasonably apply. Reflexivity denotes dedicated processes of personal reflection and collective interrogation for validation and deliverable adaptation. Together, holistic reflexivity constitutes a multifaceted approach applicable to feminist ethnography or for navigating big data dilemmas in social media research, such as cookies in 2018. The acknowledgement of strong objectivity was foundational to this inquiry in problematizing the data collection, troubleshooting methodological dilemmas, and countering algorithmic bias. Epistemological learning exchanges were conducted with the dual lens of using digital technology for social change in Latin America and the Caribbean region, and decolonizing violence against women research, such as co-development of interventions, analysis of Caribbean linguistics in intimate partner violence, and establishing the parameters for using intersectionality for violence against women research. And then the final collection of qualitative methods, gender analysis. Once we had the initial reporting, a gender transformative lens was applied by WMW co-founder Hilary Nicholson to assess and regulate terminology and meaning. Sense making was key. Everyone got involved with that. The role of AI in illuminating social research and policy making and resource allocation is experimental and largely unregulated. So there was a lot of sense to be made. And then the monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. This form of results-based management follows Oxfam Canada's Feminist Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability and Learning, otherwise known as FMEAL. It's a structure that we adapted for local resonance. And to sum up, do no harm, first and foremost, center survivors, acknowledge subjectivity, practice holistic reflexivity, take decolonial steps, and ultimately shift unequal power. So onto limitations. The results do not represent all Jamaicans nor all Jamaican online users. Despite this near saturation of internet usage, through smartphones, demographic markers still apply, such as higher education and employment. And so people with more online access may be overrepresented. Accepting influencers, individual demographic profiles were not collected. Search data was exclusively compiled from Google, and social data excluded private online communities, so your WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and the dark web. We did not focus on prevalence or detection tools. And on to the results. 11 prominent narratives about gender violence in Jamaica were identified and interpreted. And so quite binary disaggregation in terms of sex. Cultural groups were baby boomers and millennials. The drivers, value-driven discourse is critical to the findings. And whether the nature of a post that's being made is individual or institutional values being generated through organizations and systems, whereas individual ones come from thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Both shape attitudes and behavior about gender and violence. And then moving on to the nature of the comment or the belief behind it. Is it prescriptive or descriptive? So being prescriptive in nature is discussing how people should behave, what they should say and do, whereas descriptive comments explore how people actually behave and what they say and do. For the rate of change, we had 4 groups of narratives: emerging narratives, dominant, stable, and receding. So each of these is located in human territory. When we add in the size, the speed, the direction, and force with which harmful discourse about gender-based violence is either advancing or retreating in the Jamaican digital space. And so to give you a glimpse of the 11 narratives, I appreciate the writing is very small. Please do download the report and you can read all the different definitions in your own time. But for now, I will just focus on a couple of them, mainly genderless violence, to provide an example of the kind of information that was collected. There is a huge amount, but altogether, these narratives are all commonly held, shared beliefs about social norms and gender stereotypes that feature in online discourse about gender-based violence in Jamaica. And so with the breakdown of the quant results, we had all these different categories to sift through, everything we've touched on, the breakdown in terms of the numbers, but also these overviews were produced, narrative logistics overview and composition overview, along with data sources, discourse hotspots, and the search volume over time. And then we look to where the narratives are actually situated. And I'd love to talk to you about all of them, but I will focus on this top left quadrant, the emerging narratives. These are the ones that are seen as being most potentially problematic. They are small in size, but growing fast. And so in theory, it gives us a predictive ability to see what's coming up in terms of harmful discourse, because we know it then, some of it translates in real life. So for prevention purposes, it could be a game changer, but it's very early days. And then just a slightly different view. Now we're looking at the value-driven discourse. And again, it's small writing. So on the vertical axis, you have the nature of the belief. At the bottom, descriptive, and at the top, prescriptive. On the horizontal, you have the driver of the belief. On the left, whether it's individual, and on the right, whether it's institutional. I'm just going to hone in on the one that's right in the middle. You can see here that trivializing risk factors is everything. It's individual, it's institutional, it's descriptive, it's prescriptive. The definition for that is that the shared belief that gender-based violence risk factors are so ingrained that they should be mocked. And 3/4 of search queries are coming from young women aged 18 to 24. And in terms of the findings for diffusion, these were in 2 main categories: responding to harmful discourse, promoting gender equality. We'll also touch on major areas for change and the We Talk target groups. But before doing that, just to give you a snapshot of findings for this single narrative, genderless violence. This is a big one. It's a dominant narrative, and almost 2/3 of posts were negative. Only 1 in 10 were neutral, nearly 1/3 positive. And the dominant group commenting on this is young men, negatively calling out perceived hypocrisy of female victimhood in the name of men's rights. Does that sound familiar? Neutral discourse speaks about the need for men to be included in conversations around violence, and positive discourse celebrates efforts in Jamaica to address gender-based violence. And so again, just a visual, not expecting anyone to be able to read this text, but you see throughout the report, we have images from social media, we have quotes, and we also have analysis in the top right. So this discussion of the trivialization of gender-based violence, risk factors, discourages survivors from accessing help and justice, and it severely undermines the development and implementation of effective prevention. And then again, just a snapshot of the kind of information that was compiled. We have in the bottom right-hand corner here, underlying causes, social sanctions, and reference groups. So for each narrative, we have a link to the causes, the consequences, and different ways that we can look to target respondents, participants, potential beneficiaries even. And so looking at the narratives together, they show clear evidence of negative reinforcement of harmful gender-based violence beliefs and practices. The emerging narratives, those fast-growing and particularly damaging narratives, require urgent multilateral response. Positive signs via the sentiment analysis, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative, this gives us insight on how to shift the discourse. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is cause for hope. Influencers are pivotal in promoting equality with counter-norms. Mutually reinforcing narratives can be leveraged together. And effective advocacy needs collaboration for campaigns and programs. We have all sorts of useful insights, not just for the wider Latin American Caribbean region, but also for the global majority. And hopefully the minority will listen as well. And then just a few examples of the kind of ways we've been disseminating the findings, the AI findings, in public messaging and community diffusion strategies. We have a media campaign, that's the launch on the right-hand side. We have a curriculum where we're rolling out modules in community workshops. We do stakeholder training, all sorts of different types of advocacy and awareness raising, local to global learning exchanges. And the local university, the University of the West Indies, recently we've just been trialing their own gender monitoring tool. We've also been involved in lectures and classes on campus and are seeking to speak to as many people as possible about this. In terms of future possibilities, it would be great to see low or no cost adaptations for civil society organizations in Jamaica, wider regional applications, but closer to home on the project, it would be great to understand if we could use AI to create the counter-norm messaging. And I'm sure we have some data scientists in the room. If anybody has any thoughts on that, please speak up in the Q&A or reach out afterwards. And so just some more images. This is where we're catering to the Jamaican audience in terms of the messaging and experimenting with a range of different visual approaches to translate the data, the findings, into workable public messaging, but it is early days. And then if you want to see a video on YouTube, it's a 60-second advert. There's the QR code. So moving on to the practical implications for advocacy interventions, we have three major areas for social change. The impact of global pornography. Yes, it's a big one. We know that it spreads everywhere, particularly through smartphones. We are really circumspect in how we can change that from the work that we are doing. What we are much more focused on is the national level and locally, community. Young people are extremely desensitized to violence through overexposure, both online and offline in Jamaica. So education and awareness is needed to shift that. Access to information is key, particularly ensuring that it's available and reliable and not harmful, but helpful. We talk target groups here. We looked particularly at adolescent mothers, at young people, at older women, and those who are economically dependent on intimate violent partners. And so just to talk a little bit about that, prevalent social acceptance of abusive and exploitative intimate relationships increases the vulnerability of teenage mothers. So Jamaican youth are susceptible to discriminatory attitudes and myths with consequences for their behaviors and relationships. Things like accepting corporal punishment, and that is one of the narratives, a child disciplined and gender-based violence impedes emotional development, contributing to intergenerational cycles of violence. Women over 60 in Jamaica may be victims or perpetrators of financial abuse and transactional relationships. Limited discourse surrounding this demographic highlights the need for greater awareness and support for older women. And individuals who are economically dependent on an intimate partner for security, shelter, and sustenance are at heightened risk of abuse. The normalization of transactional relationships and corporal punishment further exacerbate these vulnerabilities. And so to situate the AI findings, firstly, using them for social research, what we learned really, first and foremost, something that we knew before, but it was really reinforced, to center survivorship for holistic intersectionality, to avoid exclusionary gatekeeping. That was great. With the AI, we didn't have to knock down anyone's door. We didn't have to induce survey fatigue or secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. We sought to limit social desirability bias. I say in favor of algorithmic, it certainly wasn't in favor, but yes, there's work to be done in both areas. Also, the ability to shape AI to interrogate unsolicited perspectives was very welcome. And then maximizing the safe space for all involved and reinforcing, reducing the prospect of AI reinforced discrimination. And so reflections on the process. Particularly looking at intersectionality, decoloniality, and the relationship between those two with AI. And I look here to some research which has explored the intersectional difference, starting with ageism and layering impact for older people living with disabilities, sexism, racism, and classism. And this is titled Digital Ageism, Algorithmic Bias, and Feminist Critical Theory. Examples of systemic inequities affect this population include automated medical diagnoses, resource allocation, and an underlying assumption that older people, especially women, are technologically illiterate. So the ability and predisposition of AI to mirror human prejudice is underlined. Implications for the We Talk target group of elder women are to promote intergenerational dialogue for mutual support in dealing with AI-driven forces, as well as protective strategies for self-care and seeking help. A recent meta-analysis of violence, abuse, and neglect experienced by older women in rural and remote areas concluded that the prevalence of abuse against older rural women is significant. Emotional abuse stands out as a major issue, which needs comprehensive interventions. And current research from the World Health Organization finds that women over 60 are more empowered and informed than younger women, yet significantly exposed to emotional violence and economic abuse. The We Talk findings are further supported by the Jamaican Women's Health Survey and the recent UNICEF Facts, that's the Violence Against Children survey published in November 24, that young people are exposed to multifaceted gender violence at home, on the streets, in school, in communities, with teenage mothers facing particular risks. And so just to take a look at the ethics of AI, it's still largely unregulated. It was great to hear the critique, more than one, about legal processes and efforts to regulate. But at the moment, it's uncharted. And so we need these principles, these rules of engagement that I've mentioned before. And on the left, we found very clearly that using AI magnifies data. Of course it does, multiplies scale, but it really amplified the results for us. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Can I just get a time check, please? And so while that's coming in.
Sorry, Helen, I don't want to interrupt you again. So it's you have technically 2 minutes left, but you started late. So yeah, if maybe another 10 minutes or so would be great, if that works for you.
I would love that if that's okay for all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, lovely. Okay, so I do want to reflect on this a little bit because it really brings together everything that we were grappling with and navigating, but also I think it makes it more accessible, hopefully, and I'd love to hear feedback about this in the Q&A, makes it more accessible to STEM people to really be thinking about, and particularly designers, to really be thinking about the implications of this. And so the terrain is considered in Afrofeminist data futures. This is via the datafication in the lives and security of African women and girls. It acknowledges the scope for democratization of livelihoods, which is great, but as with a long list of inventions emanating from the global north, From imperialism to fertilizer, AI offers disease and cure with the potential power to exacerbate or remedy the ailments of an entire continent. At the interpersonal level, looming and imagined horizons embody gendered risks emanating from the presence of AI in human interactions, spanning domestic and intimate caregiving, from sex robots to disembodied voices emanating from inanimate speakers. Violations already occur through existing manifestations of AI that palpably infringe upon physical and virtual bodily integrity, whether surveillance devices or deep-faked revenge porn. Accordingly, AI needs feminism to ensure integrity of process, but in turn, feminism needs AI as this magnifier of data and as fuel for sustainability in a limited and limiting world. Harmonious with Caribbean and diasporic and indigenous feminisms, First Nation reasoning offers a counter-philosophy to the ontological juggernaut of AI, drawing upon Pacific ancestral beliefs and mythology as a framework for ethical engagement. We have good growth based on inclusive governance and longevity, rather than scalability, which is given as a natural antidote to the untrammeled advancement of the global technology sector. And so to quote, indigenous epistemologies are much better at respectfully accommodating the non-human. We retain a sense of community that is articulated through complex kin networks, anchored in specific territories, genealogies, and protocols. Ultimately, our goal is that we, as a species, figure out how to treat these new non-human kin respectfully and reciprocally, and not as mere tools or worse, slaves to their creators. An exploration of the vast nature of relationships that sustain life includes recognition of non-human beings and their attendant complexities. So whilst this argument may seem beguiling for development applications, whether AI could adopt or mimic animistic nuances to the degree required to not only learn from, but also develop respect for indigenous peoples, and then reciprocate that respect algorithmically, that remains to be discovered. So briefly onto recommendations. Firstly, for AI programmers, to reduce prejudice in AI, take a rights-based approach. Focus on ethical risks and rewards in design and delivery of products. For civil society organizations, enhance media literacy. Develop AI awareness for critical analysis. Use statistical snapshots and evidence-based soundbites to communicate this information. Develop interventions engaging with men and boys. And then for all stakeholders, center survivors to counter shame, stigma, and victim blaming. Challenge beliefs that limit gender roles and normalize violence, promote self-care and healing and healthy relationships through help-seeking behavior. And then for funding and funders and fundraising, prioritize gender sensitization among decision makers and include gender responsive budgeting in proposals and grants. So to close, and really thinking about next steps for action. Effective prevention of online gender-based violence requires AI literacy, while the technology sector is increasingly taking and being forced to take responsibility. Online and offline, multi-agency duty bearers and cross-sector stakeholders must coordinate to regulate mechanisms and amplify impact. This includes rights-based advocates from civil society, many of whom hail from social backgrounds, community volunteering, and humanities disciplines, rather than STEM, as the natural foundation for AI literacy. In gender-based violence prevention, this amounts to a collective duty to acknowledge the existence of AI in everyday life. We can't really ignore it, but also to embrace literacy as a necessary personal and communal safeguarding tool, firstly to defend human space from AI, but also to protect virtual space from human predators. In order to achieve this, a sustained process of orientation and sensitization on AI in accessible formats for diverse learners is a prerequisite. News reports, opinion pieces, scholarly literature, training networks about AI and human rights are all multiplying at an eye-watering rate. To ease the journey, AI offers this distinctive multiplier effect, attracting interest when attached to less enticing topics, such as feminism or violence against women. And through such exposure, AI may also open up new funding avenues for grassroots advocacy organizations from the technology sector. In so doing, a sustainable shift away from dependency on state donors of the global north and international NGO grants, that shift towards decoloniality can be envisioned. And my references, not so easy on the eye, and a couple of my favorite references, particularly on the left, Feminist AI, Critical Perspectives on Data, Algorithms, and Intelligent Machines by Oxford University Press. Data Feminism, which has been around for quite a few years now, 2017, the Gender Reboot, Reprogramming Gender Rights in the Age of AI, and on the right, The Good Robot, Why Technology Needs Feminism. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. So on the left, if you'd like to visit WNW's website, that's the QR code. And on the right, we have the QR code for the report itself. Love to hear from anyone who wants more information about the study. Thank you all for listening and welcoming questions.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you want to say something? Oh, I thought your the insights into generally gender-based violence in Jamaica are super interesting, and definitely not a topic I'm very familiar with. And your reflections on AI literacy, I think, are definitely something that we all need to consider in our research, both from the tech side and the non-tech side. Any questions in the room?
I'll ask a question that's mostly technical in nature. So I'm not going to question the results or the findings from your study. I think that they're interesting and they stand on their own. But you did ask for feedback about artificial intelligence as a mechanism or a modality for actually getting those insights. So artificial intelligence is known to actually generate bias. Bias is inherent in the nature of it. It's not, I don't think, inherent in the nature of how you code an AI algorithm. It's inherent in the data that you feed into the AI algorithm in order to train the system, and then the implications that you do in terms of categorizing the results when you're looking for something. And the bias gets introduced because we want to find a certain kind of result in a data analysis. And so we come to it with our own bias as we train the AI machine learning, the deep learning, whatever algorithm you're actually implementing. So my question is this: if you come to it with a framework, whatever that framework is, I think the vocabulary you're using is discourse. This is not my area of expertise. But if you come to it with some kind of a framework and you train the AI around that framework, then the AI is going to find those biases because those are what you're going to categorize what you're looking for. So, so the very criticism of AI and the techniques that are being used and the bias that's introduced in order to create sort of a gender-based bias in artificial intelligence systems could also be introduced when you're looking for a gender-based bias. And so my question to you is, how did you control for that? And how would you what kind of advice would you have for the data analyst going forward in order to make sure that you don't just introduce a negative bias, or an inverse bias is maybe a better way of putting it, an inverse bias to what might already exist in some sort of these categorization systems that are already available?
Thank you for that question. I love that. And it's really taken me back to the early days when we would just thinking, what on earth is this, and how do we go about it? So I want to be clear that the decolonial feminist framework was not something that was applied to Quilt AI before they began. It's something that we worked with on the qualitative side to make sense of it before we could understand the quant side of things. So it was an iterative process. And at times it was internal, at times it was joint, at times it was all partners, at times it was specialist. So we were all engaging with the process in different ways, sometimes collectively and sometimes apart. So Quilt did their whatever they did, and I would not claim for a second to understand beyond the basics, beyond that four-step process that I outlined in terms of exactly what they were doing. But what we were doing regularly with them was feeding back and meeting together and asking a lot of questions. And I think in those early stages that there was no decolonial feminist framework. We were asking lots and lots of questions. And it's through that early relationship that we had with Quilt and the partners that I was certainly starting to think, like, how do we manage this? And so it really developed as an organic process, bearing in mind that Quilt AI is essentially a market research company. So if you look on their website now, I think it's Makeup for Men is what's trending this month. They're not specialists in gender or violence or equality. So what we had to have was constant dialogue. And you mentioned the term discourse. I use that more to refer to the harmful online discourse. Of course, it can mean many different things, but what we had as partners and as interdisciplinary researchers was an awful lot of conversation. So whether or not that constitutes a framework on its own, I'm not convinced. Well, what I've done is, in some cases, retroactively, I've labeled what we did. At the time when it began, we were extremely reticent to go ahead with it. So that took quite a lot of sensitization. And that's when I really started reading more widely around the issue and started seeing that actually that we did have a right to be there in the room and to be talking about this issue and working on it and contributing, and that our views about it did count, even if we don't understand the numbers beyond what we see on the screen. In terms of advice, well, I would say reading is what really helped me. Lots of different reading. There is an endless amount of not just AI in our lives, but discussion about it and content. And to some degree, it feels inescapable. And personally speaking, it's not what I was intending to be working on a couple of years ago. It's something, actually, it began because we didn't have a tech comms officer who otherwise would have been rolling up their sleeves and getting into it, and probably focused a lot more on the quant side than I have, certainly in this talk. What interested me was how these two different areas relate to each other. And certainly, if we go back to really, I think the essence of your question is how you control for that, is that there was a distinction between the quantitative methods that were happening and the qualitative methods that were happening. They weren't constantly melded together in a way, as far as I can tell from my vantage point, that it would then be introducing biases in that way. I will go back and ask more about that to the more tech-minded people on the projects, and it's giving me food for thought. But I do want to be clear that the framework didn't begin like that. It began with a project deliverable that was outlined in a very specific way, which wasn't scholarly at all. So I'll stop there, but please feel free to ask another question if that didn't really get to the bottom of it.
Actually, that was a very good answer. And just to be clear, my goal here is not to challenge the outcomes, the results, or the work in any way. It's just I'd like to be able to understand how you could control for that bias. I've been doing data analytics like this for 30 years, and now you know a little bit about how old I am. And I can tell you that getting that bias out of any system, especially an AI type system, is extremely difficult to do because it's the old garbage in is garbage out. So no attempt to criticize you in any way, shape, or form, just trying to understand whether or not it was thought about, and apparently it was. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you too. Yeah, I think we thought about everything too much. We're just really to the point that we're just going around in circles. And so just finally on that point about bias, and you see just now I've been weighing up the difference between social desirability bias and algorithmic bias, and whether we can really ever escape one or both of the other. We're all biased. And I think that was really the essence of this approach, is that with holistic reflexivity in particular, you start by acknowledging that. You start by acknowledging there's no such thing as objectivity in research, whether it's computers doing it, or whether it's humans, whether it's in a laboratory, or whether it's on the street.
Great, thank you, Helen. That was really insightful. I think we will break now since we're a little bit over our time, but I hope to see you later in the session if you're if it's not too late where you are, but it would be great to speak to you a bit more.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm staying up for the whole thing.
Oh, amazing. Okay, well, we'll see you later. Thanks again.
So, please, if you all can be here after the break, maybe just at half past one, right? Yeah, we will have more discussion session, and hopefully we will bring together all the challenges that we have been mentioning. So, yeah, enjoy your lunch and see you in a week.